Hi everyone, we hope that you can hear us. Welcome to our latest social checkup webinar. I'm Becky, I'm the Director of Social Media here at Ogilvy Health World. And in the room with me, we have Rick Evans, who's a Senior Digital Strategist also at Ogilvy Health World. Chloe Particus, who's our Social Director. And we also have Jackie Kivers, who's the CEO of Convosphere. We would love to hear whether you attended EASD this year or whether you followed it online. So please do use the chat function via the webinar software so we can see if you're tuned in. So just to give you an overview of Ogilvy Health World, we're an expert health communications community, and we're also part of WPP Health and Wellness. And we build social strategies and programs to really help change health behaviours and inspire better health outcomes. And I'm just going to pass you over to Jackie, who will give you an overview of Convosphere.
Thank you. So Convosphere is a social listening agency. We support our partners in the life sciences in over 45 languages, looking at online conversations to develop insights and recommendations that help answer strategic business questions using social as a data source.
Thanks, Jackie. So this is our third webinar that we've done this year, and this one was specifically looking at conversations around EASD. So from the 1st to the 5th of October this year, the Global Diabetes Spotlight really fell on Berlin, where it was the 54th annual meeting of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. And over those 5 days, it was anticipated that over 15,000 delegates from all around the world met to discuss the latest developments in medical and scientific diabetes research. And so Ogilvy Health World and Convosphere have partnered to bring you the top social media insights that we saw from this Congress. So over the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so, we're going to give you an overview of the most engaging social media content that we saw from both the pharmaceutical companies and the HCPs and patients that were there at the Congress. We're going to look at which pharma companies were most widely discussed on Twitter, the key topics of discussion, and also we're going to look at the specifically into the clinical trials that were mentioned. And we really hope that you'll find this interesting and insightful, and you can use these insights when you're planning your social media content and activities at Congress going forward. We're going to be answering questions at the end, but please do send through any questions that you have and you think about during the webinar using that chat function, and we'll hopefully have time to answer all of those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jackie, who will take you through the start of our insights.
Thank you. So EASD occurred over 5 different days. The annual meeting took place between the 1st through the 5th of October, and we analyzed conversations that were happening during this period on Twitter that mentioned the official hashtag of EASD or EASD 2018. As you would expect to see, the peak number of tweets per day was in the middle of the Congress week, with the most activity and conversation happening then. There were 3,851 tweets per day and a total of 15,668 tweets over the course of the Congress. Of those, 4,283 were unique authors, so by that you can understand that many of them were participating quite a bit over the course of the Congress. We saw that compared to previous years, there was more conversation happening online around the Congress, and there's been a steady increase of volume at EASD over the last few years. It's different from what we've seen during other congresses, such as ASCO this year, where we actually saw a reduction in the number of tweets. We also saw a decrease in posting from pharma companies in general on their corporate social media channels in our yearly report that analyzes the pharma social landscape. Another thing that we noted was attendees were not encouraged to take photos of the presentations or within the different rooms, but much of the content that was shared online did in fact include photos of this content. So often in online conversations across different therapeutic areas, physicians or HCPs represent anywhere from 3 to 9% of the therapeutic area discussion. And we know that social media is an important tool for HCPs, and where we really see this increase and then have more conversation and engagement is at Congress. So during EASD this year, HCPs made up 40% of all of the unique authors who were captured in this study on Twitter. And this has increased, as you can see, over the years, and quite a bit since 2015. It shows that Twitter is more important than ever for HCPs to share information and news from the Congress, especially to those who can't attend the event itself. The type of engagement that we see by HCPs on Twitter is also very different at Congress as compared to the rest of the year.
So it wasn't just healthcare professionals who were talking on Twitter during the Congress. What you can see on this slide is a breakdown of some of the different groups of other people who were speaking. Unlike ASCO, which we looked at earlier this year, a much higher percentage of patients were talking over EASD. That was largely sharing disease awareness content. It was generally advocates of diabetes care linking news from the Congress back to their own networks. You'll see on here we've also got experts. These are academics. They had 18% of the conversation, and interestingly, patients had quite a large share compared to other congresses. The others category includes posts we weren't able to categorize, but you can also see on there we've got a small percentage which was media as well. The community section there is patient communities, blogs and forums that have Twitter accounts. Pharma companies actually had quite a small share in this Congress. We think that perhaps that's because they were being more strategic about the content they share and using paid promotion to increase reach and engagement. This slide here shows the people who were the top authors mentioning and using the EASD handle. Perhaps it's not a surprise there to see that EASD News was the top one of all. That's the official Congress handle. Looking at the breakdown of the other top authors in terms of mentions of the EASD hashtag, a lot of those were based in Spain. The second one there, SE Diabetes, that's the Spanish Society of Diabetes. They were actually working with AstraZeneca at the Congress to provide Spanish language content at the end of each day at the Congress. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And moving on to looking at the key trials. What you can see here are the key trials, again, in terms of the number of mentions during the Congress. The top two trials were both trials based around assessing CV safety in type 2 diabetes. Harmony study by GSK and DCRI probably had some of the most interesting results out of all of the different trials that were being spoken about there, showing that the GLP-1 receptor significantly reduced major adverse cardiovascular events in type 2 diabetes patients with established CV disease compared with placebo. This was probably a much more encouraging set of results than many of the other trials had at the Congress. Overall, the conversation around this was positive. It wasn't necessarily a super positive response with lots of healthcare professionals getting really excited about this news. Mostly it was just people just sharing the data as it stands, rather than actually sort of talking about how it made them feel or their own reactions to the study.
Now, when we looked at the key hashtags that we used over the Congress, they were very much in line with what you would expect. The official EASD 2018 hashtag was used 13,000 times throughout those 5 days, and hashtag diabetes was the second most popular. You'll notice here on the left, the diabetes EST backs up what Rick mentioned before, and we'll delve into later, that there was this side kind of Spanish conversation happening in Spanish language around the Congress. So no real surprises here. And also the hashtag focus on A1C was an initiative driven by MSD around diabetes, and they were discussing that during the Congress time. Now, when we look at the breakdown of what the HCPs were discussing, research and trials came out on top, which is what we would also normally expect to see from Congress, with nearly half of all conversations being around research and trials. And this backs up what we know that, social media is driven by news, and this was around a lot of the data and trials that were being discussed and presented at the Congress. And then secondly was kind of the presentations and seconds, which is also quite linked up with the research and trials. So very much all of the online conversation was driven by the news of what was actually happening at the Congress, and was really informative, especially for people that are interested in what was being discussed but couldn't actually physically make it to the event. Now moving on to the top engaging content that came out of the Congress. So the top post was by Sanofi, and we could see by looking in the back end of Twitter in their transparency section that this was a promoted tweet by Sanofi. So this helped them kind of come out on top with the most retweets and the likes with over 1,000. And then the second, third, and fourth top were all endocrinologists who were discussing the actual data that was presented at the Congress online. The second and the fourth ones were Spanish HCPs, and this kind of led us up into the fact that the Spanish were having their own conversation about the Congress in Spanish language, and it was very engaging, and it did quite well having this initiative.
Although pharma companies only represented a small component of the authors at this Congress, making up only 2% of the overall content, in fact, the paid promotion around that content led to many having a broad reach and a lot of engagement on their posts. NovoNordisk led the pack with 875 posts that they shared during the Congress. So we look at the level of content that the pharma companies are sharing before Congress and during Congress, and look at the level of engagement they're receiving on their content from their followers. So we look at that before and during to identify what we call our Convo score. And this is a score between 20 and 100, with 100 being the top possible score. Looking at EASD 2018, we found that NovoNordisk scored the highest, with MSD coming up closely behind. Although NovoNordisk had 874 posts throughout the Congress, and MSD had 574 total posts, they had a similar engagement on their posts. However, in the content that was shared and the way that people engaged, NovoNordisk was seen more as a leader in diabetes and overall has a higher number of followers. Now, a higher number of followers wouldn't always necessarily give an advantage if the higher level of followers engaged in the specific content that this company was sharing, and they were engaged in the content around EASD and diabetes, and they wanted to share and engage with it to a higher degree.
So if we look specifically on NovoNordisk and the activity that they did at the Congress, I think it's really clear, as Jackie said, that they really were being recognized as experts in the field of diabetes. And they specifically used the NovoNordisk Live channel, Twitter channel, which is their dedicated channel for Congress discussion. And the content that they were creating and tweeting for the Congress was really interesting. They had a number of different buckets, a number of different themes. The first one being around promoting the 5K at EASD run, which they were sponsors of, where over 1,000 people with diabetes, healthcare professionals and also organisations ran or walked together to help raise awareness of diabetes, and that was a really nice way of pulling all these different communities together around the Congress and pushing out content related to that. And we saw on Twitter advertising that they were promoting a lot of those tweets. They were also using their Team NovoNordisk athletes to promote the fact that it's possible to be an athlete with type 1 diabetes. So they did some really nice polls and pushed out some answers related to that. And they actually had people on site, so it's clear that they had a content crew on site at the Congress, filming videos of healthcare professionals and people on the ground answering questions about cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and they were able to be part of that conversation by creating that reactive content. And we saw that, actually you can see there 2 example posts of that type of content. And we also saw that they had a really strong promotion strategy as well. Something else that we saw at EASD, which we haven't seen at other congresses, or we have, but not in this much detail, was the virtual meeting. So that was a real opportunity to bring the live sessions, the abstracts, the e-posters, and the presenters all together under one virtual roof. So we saw that there was over 100,000 views of those live sessions over the 4 days and also afterwards. And interestingly, on the website, under this section, it has the ability to filter out industry-sponsored content, and that could have potentially been requested by people not wanting to see the pharma-sponsored content. And this really gives viewers the chance to watch those live sessions, look at the poster presentations, etc., even if they can't attend the Congress, and they can view it at home or in their own time. What have we learned? Hopefully that's brought to you a few key insights. So really what we've learned from doing this piece of research is that data is the hottest topic of conversation when it comes to social media and tweeting at Congress. So as Chloe showed you, 3 of the top pieces of content were from healthcare professionals, researchers who were tweeting photos of the data that came out of the Congress. We also learned that through now Twitter giving us the option to see who's using paid promotion, which tweets are being promoted, that pharma is using the paid advertising at Congress to amplify content. And we saw some really nice examples of this, and we saw some other examples which we felt could have been improved, and Chloe will talk about that in a moment. And then thirdly, it was very clear that Novo really led the way in terms of both the engagements and the mentions. And they were pushing out that really quality content, very reactive, being that advocate and that advisor who people were coming and wanting to engage with around their content and the activities that they were doing, both on-site and off-site. So what can pharma do? How can you use these insights to inform your strategy going forward? Well, data really is the hottest topic. People want to see the data, but we know that this brings limitations to pharma companies. But it's important to really consider how you can bring the data to people who can't attend. So how can you present the information that's in the exhibition hall, the Congress stands, to make it more shareable, perhaps? Data visualization is key. So making sure that the data that you're pushing out there is really easy to understand and is easily accessible to all, but also thinking about the way that people are consuming content and viewing it in their social media channels. So the fact that your content will be in competition with someone's family, friends, other brands. So it's not just in competition with pharma companies, but actually thinking about how you make your piece of content stand out on that person's timeline. And then thinking about when to release the information as well. And we know that EASD is a big congress and offers that virtual experience. But thinking about smaller congresses, perhaps pharma's got an opportunity to provide this type of content to a wider audience, obviously within the regulations.
And secondly, what we think pharma should do is, really think strategically about paid promotion and how best to amplify. what we saw when we were looking through all of the paid tweets from pharma companies is some did a lot of promotion. They promoted quite a lot of tweets, but they were quite repetitive, and also they probably would have been bidding against themselves, bringing down the overall results. So we definitely think, you know, doing less posts, but making them better, putting a bit more effort in. You know, looking at Sanofi, their post was very detailed, but it was data and facts, which can be quite hard to read on a phone, for example. But we do know that the attendees of these congresses are looking for that kind of nitty-gritty data, so it does do well. And I think, you know, looking at NovoNordisk and how they approached it, they had a very agile, reactive content studio, probably on site, or they would have sent it back to their head office and just edited it straight away, which we know does take more effort and requires being really organized, but they put subtitles on, they've really framed it quite well, they've made it for mobile so that it's easy to digest this information. So, you know, spending a little bit more time and effort and planning well in advance really did pay off for NovoNordisk, and, you know, everyone should kind of look at this as the pinnacle of Congress content.
And our final point is that pharma should consider hosting a satellite social event. As Becky mentioned before, there are some rules and restrictions about how social media is used at Congress. Some congresses won't let you bring a mobile phone or have one switched on in the actual exhibition halls or during the sessions. And of course, this can limit the way that people can participate in social media. When we looked at EASD, as we mentioned before, lots of the top posters were in Spanish. It was really interesting to see that the SED, the Multidisciplinary Diabetes Society from Spain, were hosting a satellite local language virtual event in Spanish, offering conference news and opinion in local language. This is a really great idea, as it's offering something different, something that they're not doing at the main Congress, and something more relevant to local physicians in Spain who may not speak English well enough to follow the presentations that are going on. Also, the satellite event capitalizes on the fact that people are talking on social, but sidesteps the rules and restrictions that the Congress puts upon social media. So in smaller congresses where there's no virtual Congress experience, a bit like Becky mentioned before, this is a great way to share news of the Congress with a wider audience. If the Congress aren't doing this themselves, what a great opportunity for pharma to work with a third-party group and enable this. As you can see in this case, AstraZeneca worked with the society to provide this content.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our EASD Social Media Insights webinar. However, we do have some time now to answer some of your questions. Okay, so we've got a question that's come in from Stephen. How does the HCP engagement compare with other major disease congresses?
Well, of course, we did a recent study of ASCO, and we found at ASCO as well that 40% of healthcare professionals were dominating the discussion. So it's almost exactly the same in terms of the percentage of people who are talking across these two big congresses. And for both of those congresses as well, I think we should mention that it's sort of gone up year on year. Actually, ASCO was probably a bit further ahead for a few years, the oncologists probably being a bit more comfortable on social media, but the diabetes experts are certainly catching up.
One other component to that was ASCO saw around 95,000 tweets, and a lot of that is because ASCO as a Congress itself helps promote engagement on social media through sharing hashtags and asking people to actively share online.
Any other questions? Nerea asked, will there be another webinar soon? Yes, there definitely will be, and we would love suggestions from you as to which Congress, event, or Health Awareness Day even that we look at next. So please do email us with your suggestions. Stephen, you ask another question. How much do traditional media outlets feature in or drive Congress-related social media? For this, we didn't look at that or do a deep dive into that specifically. Jackie, I don't know if you've got any experience of that from...
Yeah, traditionally, traditional media will maybe do 1 or 2 articles about the event itself and or some of the new clinical trial results that are released there. But really, the highest amount of engagement comes across on Twitter as a social channel, because it's one place that all of the attendees can speak about the content being shared, and it does seem to have the largest volume of Congress-specific content.
Oh, we've got another one that's just come in from Kai. What's your experiences with HCP medical conference social media use at a national country level? For example, in the UK or Germany, is there a similar trend?
There are similar trends. So this Congress happened this year in Berlin. Last year, I think it happened in Spain. Wherever they happen, the general language spoken at the HCP Congress in whatever country it's in is generally in English, but we do see some, oh, it was in Portugal.
Thanks, Stephen.
We do see some local language content. So this year we saw some Spanish, and we see a few other languages, but they don't represent very much of the overall conversation. So English seems to be the language, regardless of countries, where they communicate on Twitter.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important to mention that the reason we saw a big set of Spanish conversations taking part this time at the conference in Germany was because of a concerted effort by that Spanish Diabetes Society working with AstraZeneca to provide that content in Spanish to Spanish healthcare professionals. So it's probably not happening organically, but it's possible to do things at a local language level. It might even be helpful to do things at a local language level in countries where doctors might not have a very good level of English and still might be interested in what's being discussed at the meeting.
One other place where we see it is where HCPs who are actually attending the Congress want to share their insights or findings back with their local HCPs, and then they would translate key insights, findings, and share that back in the local language with their extended network back home.
Did we see much use of video? Thanks, Antonia. Yeah, I think we can give details around the specific breakdown of the types of content that we saw, but we definitely did see lots more video this year, and a mixture between animation and live video, and also recorded video.
Some of the video content that performed the best was video content that was created live at the actual event. So there was a post which was on one of the slides that we showed, which I think was put out by NovoNordisk, which had an interview with a healthcare professional there. Of course, that's really, really powerful content because it's live, it's from the actual event. It's also featuring a healthcare professional who are the main audience for the event. So it's finding somebody who's relevant as a vox pop. Again, if you were creating video content for an awareness day, you might want to feature a patient more prominently in that video content. So it's all really about thinking about what kind of voice or person speaking in a video is going to be relevant to the audience who are going to be in attendance. And generally, we have seen that kind of more relevant content is also the content that's more engaging.
Okay, I think we're going to finish up there unless there are any more questions coming through. Oh, I don't think so. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us, info@convosphere.com or the socialcheckup@ogilvy.com. And we hope to see you again very soon. Thanks for joining.